Warning: this episode of the podcast discusses mental health, psychological triggers, and contains graphic descriptions of violence and gore. If any of these things disturb or distress you in any way, I would advise not listening to this episode, but if you decide you want to, please listen to this with extreme caution and at your own risk. I don't want the fact that I triggered any distress or trauma on my conscience, so please be careful. Also know that this episode will contain heavy spoilers for the Made in Abyss anime and the manga. You have been warned. So for everyone looking at this anime and thinking, oh, this looks so adorable, I bet this is a light, fun little series, all cute and fluffy where nothing bad happens, it is a trap! A trap! It is lies, all lies, it is lying to you! Nothing bad happens, everything bad happens. Everything that could possibly go bad goes bad. It's a trap! Run! Run fast! Run far! Get out of here! Don't look back! Save yourselves! Hey everyone, my name is Jacob, but the trolls, they call me Snowflake. So, can I ask you guys a question? Have you ever had a piece of media that you loved so much? Like, you loved it so much that it was one of the best things you'd ever seen, and you just wanted more and more and more of it, but then it just turned around and bit you so hard that it almost physically hurt you. And like the fact that you loved it so much kind of only made it hurt all the worse. That's basically kind of my experience with Made in Abyss in a nutshell. You know, it wasn't anything problematic in the show, though there is one big issue with the show and the manga that I will bring up later, but my problem with Made in Abyss is nothing so academic and nothing so objective. My problem with Made in Abyss is something much more personal and much more unique to myself and a very specific group of people. I'll get into that a little bit later, but first I kind of want to talk about why I fell so deeply and so madly in love with this show. Far across the sea of Beoluska, on top of a sheer rocky island, is the town of Orth, built around a massive gaping opening in the earth, said to be the very last place on Earth that has yet to be fully explored, known to the people of Orth as the Abyss. A massive open cave that stretches at least 20,000 meters down into the earth. Some legends speak of an immortal golden city that sleeps at its bottom, waiting to be discovered. Others say that it's a portal to the netherworld and the afterlife. But one thing people know for sure is that the Abyss is home to dangerous creatures and the relics of a highly advanced, long-lost civilization, along with the graves of its former inhabitants, all found with their hands clasped in prayer. But perhaps the most dangerous thing in the Abyss is the invisible threat known as the Curse of the Abyss, which spares those who dive down into it, but attacks those who try to ascend even a few meters within it, with afflictions ranging from mild dizziness and nausea, to bleeding from every orifice of your body, to even the loss of humanity and death, with the curse becoming more and more severe the deeper one goes. The Abyss is divided into layers, with the deeper layers being the most dangerous, and it is not uncommon for those who dive into the Abyss to never return again, either from the wildlife or from the curse, and it is said that the curse is so severe past the 6th layer that return from it is completely impossible. Those who brave the dangers of the Abyss and scour its depths in search of relics of incredible power are called delvers, classified by the color of the whistles they wear, with the most skillful, brave, and successful of these delvers being the White Whistles, who are of near legendary status and almost in the class of folk hero in Orth, said to have retrieved relics which have changed the world, or with powers so immense that they defy comprehension. The main character of Made in Abyss is Riko, a young girl growing up in an orphanage in Orth, whose mother was a famous White Whistle known as Liza the Annihilator, who Riko has never formally met. And Riko wants nothing more than to become a White Whistle one day and follow in her mother's footsteps, exploring parts of the Abyss that no one has ever seen before. And one day, when collecting minor artifacts from the 1st layer of the Abyss, Riko comes across a robot named Reg, who resembles a young boy, and who has no memories of who he is or where he comes from. Soon afterwards, a messenger balloon comes up from within the Abyss, supposedly from Riko's mother, carrying her notes and observations down in the 7th layer, along with a message, "I'll be waiting at the bottom of the Abyss." With that, Riko and Reg head down into the Abyss behind the backs of their teachers at the orphanage, in pursuit of Liza, as well as in search of Reg's memories, due to the fact that a figure sketched out in Liza's notes seems to have an awfully strong resemblance to Reg himself. Now, as an aspiring author and as someone who loves the craft of writing and the process of creating really magical, awe-inspiring works of literature, one of my absolute favorite things in writing is world building. I am absolutely addicted to stories that have really, really good world building, and I'm willing to overlook a lot of problems so long as a story has the world building that makes it worth it. And Made in Abyss has that in spades. Seriously, Made in Abyss has some of the most impeccable, comprehensive, and genius world building I have ever seen. Orth and how they almost really deify the White Whistles and their whole culture around mining the Abyss, the different layers of the Abyss and the different levels of the curse that go with them, and the mystery surrounding the Abyss and who was there before. But I really think that the most genius decision that the creator of this series did was coming up with the Curse of the Abyss, because not only does it add more mystery and more tension to the story, but it also reinforces the nature of Riko's decision to delve into the Abyss in search of her mother. Now, plot holes are something that, as a writer, you just dread, especially in our modern times, and not plot holes as in, why the hell did this character do something that was clearly foreshadowed beforehand, but I just can't be bothered to pay attention long enough, but like legitimate plot holes that like undermine the entire story and like remove all tension that you were trying to build when people realize it. It's something I know that I worry about, especially as an autistic writer, and worry about missing something that everyone else will see super easily. And one of the potentially big plot holes in Made in Abyss could have very easily been, well, if it gets hard, they can always just go back up, so why be worried? And it's the curse of the Abyss, that force that can kill you if you attempt to climb up from a deep enough point, that makes Riko's journey so final and so tragic, but also so beautiful, and makes her such a strong character. Reg is a robot. He's not affected by the curse, but Riko is human, and she's not ignorant of the danger. She knows a lot about the Abyss and the curse. She's been preparing to go down into it practically since she was born. Wink, wink. So she's fully aware that to go down to the 7th layer where her mother is, she's probably never going to be able to go back up again. And she's leaving behind everyone she has ever known. She's turning her back on the entire world and co-signing herself to probably spending the rest of her life in the Abyss and never seeing any of them again. But she never lets that stop her. Riko knows that this is what she wants to do more than anything in the world. And everything she ever wanted is down in the Abyss. So even though it absolutely rips her heart out to never see any of her friends and loved ones again, she still goes for it, throwing herself into the depths of danger for the chance of actually achieving what she always wanted to. And you might say, well, she's literally 12 years old. She has no idea what she's getting into. She can't possibly know how dangerous it is down there. And yeah, you're not wrong, but that's kind of the point and kind of one of the things I love about it. Like, Riko is 12, and even though she studied the Abyss for years and is a veritable encyclopedia of facts about it and knowledge about how to survive there, she still can't possibly know what to expect. I mean, no one really can in that sort of situation. And yeah, she's probably being a little naive and optimistic, but that's kind of how 12-year-olds are. They think that they've got it all figured out, and they think that they can handle everything that life throws their way. I know that's how I was when I was 12. And then as you get older, you realize that you know absolutely nothing. Why the hell didn't anyone warn me about this? Please, someone help me. And Riko does very quickly realize that she is definitely way out of her depth, and that transversing the Abyss is way more dangerous than she ever thought it would be. And she is kind of forced to grow up along the way, but she never lets any of that stop her. She keeps striding forward, and she keeps fighting onward no matter what. She takes whatever terrible things happen to her, and trust me, terrible things happen to Riko, but she just keeps looking forward, and that's honestly pretty damn inspiring. And can I honestly just say that so much of this anime is so damn inspiring. Like the more I think about what works so well about it, the more I just want to go and make my own work that is hopefully just as good as this show, or at least even half as good as this show. And this show, I think, perfectly captures that beautiful feeling that comes with discovery, exploration, and adventure. The wonder, the excitement, the awe, the hope, the fear, the danger, the heartbreak, the determination, the exhilaration, the loss, and every single emotion in between all of those things. And that's not something that's easy to do at all. Honestly, like when, the point in the first few episodes when Riko and Reg disappear down into the abyss, leaving their friends behind above them, I had freaking tears in my eyes. And it's also really interesting as well that it's sort of based off of sort of real things. Like the Curse of the Abyss is based off of the bends, which is something that you see in things like diving, where, when you go down to a certain depth, you can't come right back up again because nitrogen dissolves into your blood at greater depths. And if you rise up too fast, the nitrogen will come out of your blood, and it can cause some pretty serious problems if you don't mitigate for it. And so divers, when they go down really deep, they have to kind of come up very, very slowly over several hours to allow the nitrogen to slowly diffuse out of their blood, else they could be in real danger. And that's kind of what's so amazing, is that the curse, it makes sense, but it's still such a genius move. It's based on something real, but at the same time, it also serves such a very important purpose. And another thing that I think is so genius about this show, and that I absolutely love about this show, is that when you go exploring, things rarely ever go as planned. And what you run into is almost never what you expected it to be. And this show is very, very good at giving you a very clear overview of the most basic information right at the beginning, without being just a massive info dump like you tend to have with certain shows like this. Like, you know exactly what Riko is expecting to come across within the Abyss and the way that she sees the world. But the show works to dismantle all of the things that Riko has been taught, and it just peels away all of it to reveal something so much darker, so much grayer, so much more unpredictable, so much older, so much more entrenched, and much, much, much more complicated than we ever thought it would be. Which is, I guess, maybe something very much like growing up in a lot of ways. And I think that the absolute height of this feeling in this show, when I feel it's at its most successful, is around halfway to 2/3 through the season, when Riko and Reg make it to the bottom of the second layer of the Abyss, where they've been told to find someone named Ozin, who they quickly discover is the white whistle known as Ozin the Immovable, who was also Riko's mother, Liza's teacher, before she became a white whistle as well. And now, of course, Riko is over the moon about this. She's grown up in North, learning all about the White Whistles, hearing stories about their adventures and the things they've done, and to find her mother's teacher to boot. She's immediately in awe of Ozin, but we very, very quickly find out that Ozin, and really the White Whistles by proxy, aren't exactly the shining culture heroes that those in Orth made them out to be. Ozin is very quickly revealed to be quite a twisted, warped kind of person. She's very sinister. She often walks around with this big hunch to her back, with her arms sticking out, which makes her look almost like some giant black insect or crow. She has a very dark sense of humor and this kind of very aloof attachment to humanity and to morality in general. She smiles when she thinks about things that are honestly pretty disturbing and even horrifying. She says exactly what she feels and thinks without sugarcoating or holding back any of it, no matter how mean, how blunt, how cold, or how disturbing. She can even be pretty cruel and brutal when she wants to be, not to mention that she is at least a head taller than everyone else in the story and towers over Riko and Reg, who barely come up to her knees. She honestly comes off as something of a villain, but luckily the show lets you get to know her a lot better, and though she certainly isn't an entirely good person, you do eventually come to see that she's not entirely evil either. Now, Ozin has this rather strange hairstyle that almost looks like horns, which of course add to her sinister appearance. This is eventually revealed to cover up the scars on her head from where the Curse of the Abyss has deformed her skull. As she puts it, deep within it, the Abyss creeps into your mind. Eventually it'll get your body as well. Unlike the curse from the 6th layer, those don't manifest immediately. For every expedition, you'll stand at the precipice of death and insanity, twisting the skin off your head. Ozin has been going down into the Abyss for a very, very long time. She's probably twice the age of Riko's mother, as she was already an accomplished White Whistle back when Liza was Riko's age. And you quickly put together that, well, of course that would take a huge toll on you, both physically and psychologically. You're living in a place for literal decades, where everything, even the space itself, is constantly trying to kill you in the most terrible ways. And that affects you, it twists you, and it warps you. It shows just how cruel the Abyss can really be to live and work in, how living like this twists and warps your sense of self and your personality, how you will wind up having to do some pretty terrible things in order to become a white whistle. And she shows Riko that white whistles aren't the idealized figures that she grew up with in Orth, that white whistles are dangerous people and are not to be crossed. That really, to make a career out of delving into the abyss over and over and over again for years and decades on end, you kind of have to be a little bit mad. She even warns Riko of several other white whistles further down in the abyss who she needs to watch out for. But just because Ozin is a tough, somewhat creepy person, and just because she's been living and working in the abyss for decades, that doesn't mean that she's entirely cruel and entirely heartless. She certainly comes off that way at first, but as Riko and Reg interact with her and get to know her a little bit more, they eventually come to see that actually Ozin actually does really care about them and about their well-being and actually wants to help them, just in her own warped and detached way. She knows about the realities that Riko and Reg are going to face down in the lower layers of the abyss, and she wants to prepare them for it. So she doesn't hold back in using her very, very considerable strength against them, and she doesn't spare them any slack when it comes to the training and preparation that she sets out for them, because to do anything else would be a disservice to them and be a disrespect to them and what they want to do. And she does all of that in the end because she wants them to survive and be able to find Liza at the end of their journey. She's actually far from evil. It's just that she sees things from a different perspective and comes at things in a different way. She actually likes Riko and Reg and wants to help them. She just does it in a way that comes off as creepy or mean, but is really actually just in their best interests. And as someone who is also kind of screwed up, and as someone who is autistic and often comes off in ways that are very much not intended, I really came to fall in love with Ozin to the point where she's probably my favorite character in the entire story. That the arc I went on from being very creeped out at first to angry and hating her guts in the middle to falling in love with her and gaining so much affection for her by the end was just such an absolute pleasure to go on. It was just such a wonderful ride that was laid out for me. And like when she's seeing Riko and Reg off as they're about to head down into the third layer, and again, probably never to see her again, Ozin very dispassionately says, "I'd like it if I didn't have to send them off until I've reminisced enough." And the minute I heard that, I was just like, oh, Ozin. Because really, like, that's her way of saying, I'm really going to miss those two, and I wish they could have stayed here with me. I wish I could have spent more time with them, and I wish that I could see them again. It's just the most beautiful, bittersweet scene, and is 100% my favorite moment of the entire season and of the entire story, like, bar none. And can I also just mention that the song that plays under this scene is truly one of the most beautiful songs I've ever heard. It's called Hanezeve Karadhina by Kevin Penkin, who is the main composer for the anime's soundtrack, and it is so beautiful. This soundtrack has gotten a lot of praise, and while I don't necessarily adore every single song of the soundtrack, and there are definitely other animes whose soundtracks I love completely and utterly, like Dot Hack Sign, this one really, I think, captured the feeling that the show was really going for. That exhilaration, that excitement, that fear and danger, but ultimately the wonder of adventure and discovery. So, like, it captured it all so, so well. And there are a few songs that really stand out for me, especially Hanezeve Karadhina, which is definitely now one of my favorite songs ever. And honestly, this is really where I wish I could stop this review. There's a part of me that just wishes I could say, this anime is amazing, one of the best things I've ever watched, and you should totally go watch it now. And if it had all ended here, then maybe that's exactly what I would have done. I think that these 9 episodes of the show are honestly some of the absolute best anime episodes I have ever watched, and I'll always remember them fondly and draw on them for inspiration. But this is a review, and a review is fundamentally subjective. It's me talking about my experience of something, and as much as I can try to back up my experience and opinion as much as possible, it is still fundamentally my opinion and coming from my perspective. It's me talking about my experience and thoughts on something. And it was at this point when I ran into some major trouble with Made in Abyss. Now, Made in Abyss has had some criticism leveled at it, mainly around its usage of its underage protagonists. You see, in anime and other pulpy Japanese media, there is something called lolicon/shotacon, or loli/shota for short. This is often used to describe underage or child characters, sometimes just as a descriptive or label. Any anime or manga that primarily focuses on child characters and has a largely child cast has been called a loli/shota anime, and even individual child characters can be called a loli or shota, depending on their gender, with loli being girls and shota describing boys. But lolicon and shotacon are primarily much more explicit, adult, and sexual in nature. Essentially, it's child porn, underage children engaging in adult situations. And it's really only been fairly recently that it's been repurposed in a non-sexual way by anime fans, though still, I would advise being wary of anyone who describes certain characters as quote-unquote lolis. So, yeah. This is kind of the dark side of anime, and it's a side that if you're going to watch anime, you're kind of going to have to be prepared for to a certain extent. There are some pretty infamous animes out there where you can have children as young as 4 being depicted in some very non-PG ways, but most people steer well clear of those. And some people have found the use of preteen characters in Made in Abyss a little too similar to loli and shota shows. Personally, however, I really didn't see it that much in the show, and not so much in the manga until later. I can see where it's coming from, but I just didn't personally get it. I guess because I understand that Riko is an explorer. She's prepared for working in the wilderness and with the creatures out there, and as such, there are certain things that need to be noted, and certain things that will have to be done. When Riko first finds Reg, she looks him over and does a very thorough job of it, even attempting to report on what his genitals are like before her friends interrupt her. But when you're out observing in the wild, you make notes of everything. And I mean everything, because anything could be important, and you never know what might be important. And there are some moments where Riko does undress and, to take a bath or something. But guess what? When you're out in the wild, sometimes you need to have a bath. Sometimes you need to take a shit. That's just how it works. And I felt like the show did that fine. Later on in the manga, though, it does become a little bit more apparent and a little bit more jarring. One of the latest issues of the manga are a bunch of drawings of the main characters, and one of them, at the very end, was of Riko topless, with nothing hiding her chest. And when I saw that, I was like, really, dude? Really? You're not even going to hide it now, are you? And a lot of characters really do seem to be really interested in Reg's belly button for some reason. The manga does also refer to Riko and Reg as loli and shota in the margins at certain points. But, to that kind of criticism, I would kind of say that there are loads of animes out there that do way more and get away with it. Have you seen No Game, No Life? The show where 50% of the shots of its 11-year-old female protagonist are up her skirt? This is something I've seen around discussions of animes as of late, where you'll have a really, really beloved show, but there will be one trope or aspect of them that will really irritate people, whereas there are maybe not so beloved shows that get away with it. And I think it's sort of because these shows are so good that these tropes and aspects stick out as a result, because they do them a disservice. And maybe that's a good sign of the anime community and discussion around anime in general right now. But my main issue with Made in Abyss isn't something so objective or something so universal. No, my reason why I can't say I love Made in Abyss is something much, much more personal. Something much more specific to me and my own struggles around mental and physical health, unfortunately. You see, I struggle with anxiety. I have ever since I was a little kid. I've never known a life where I've never struggled with it. And one of the most consistent and pervasive problems I've had to deal with as a result of my anxiety is what are called stuck thoughts. Apparently they're not uncommon, but I haven't really heard a lot of other people talking about this sort of stuff. Basically, there are certain things, certain topics, certain images, certain thoughts, you could call them triggers, which bug me. I'm not going to go into exactly what those triggers are, because we're in a post-Gamergate world, in an era of the malicious troll who will gleefully send you child porn and gore just for kicks. But I will say that there are almost always situations that if I could do anything to help or stop, I would do so. But because they're fictional or recorded, I can't, so that leaves me powerless, which is something I've never really been able to handle well or let go of. These images and clips, they get stuck in my head, and they'll just keep repeating over and over and over again, like a movie clip or a YouTube video on repeat. often lasting for the rest of the day until I go to sleep, but have been known to last longer. I remember that there were times when I was a kid when this sort of thing lasted for literally months on end. These range from annoying and irritating, but not really damaging, like an itch in the back of your head, or like a child screaming down the street, or like a little tiny cut on your skin. Something that's annoying if you focus on it, but it's not going to ruin your day or anything. All the way up to completely traumatizing and horrifying. And at their absolute worst, stuck thoughts are psychological torture. Like, just imagine, like, the most terrible, most horrible, most brutal, and most traumatizing things you can possibly imagine playing over and over and over again in your head, like your own mind is acting like the doctor from A Clockwork Orange, making you watch it over and over without any ability to make it stop. And like the more you focus on it, the more it embeds itself into your mind, the clearer and more grisly it becomes, and the harder it becomes to ignore. And like you try your best to ignore it, and for a short time it works, but the minute you become aware that it hasn't happened in a while, it comes back at full force, and you scramble to try to find a distraction and relief again. And the more you try to force it out of your brain, the worse it gets, because again, you're focusing on it more. The more you fight it, the worse it gets, and the more aware you become of your own powerlessness to stop terrible, terrible things happening in this world, even to those you care about. It's like being held hostage by your own brain, and just like I'm powerless to stop terrible things from happening, I'm powerless to stop my own brain from torturing me. It just gets to the point where you just want to take a fork and you want to just ram it through your skull and gouge these images out of your brain, or bash your head against a wall and just shatter the images into 1,000 tiny little pieces so you never have to look at them again. When I was younger, I would often come up with happy scenarios for these moments that bothered me, make it so that whoever was involved would have a happy ending, or would negate whatever happened. But while that does still occasionally, rarely work, the images in my head have shifted from clips of movies and TV shows, though those still are a problem, to events that I wished weren't real, but are. And unfortunately, I guess I'm just not as good at suspending disbelief as I once was. I guess maybe when the images have kind of shifted to where I've gotten kind of more of a realistic context for them, and people will say, oh, well, you just need to expose yourself to it more. Once you get used to it, it'll stop. And yeah, that works for the minor stuff. Like for the irritation that's born out of not knowing what's happening, out of the ambiguity that really makes things a lot more scary. But like for the worst of the triggers, it only makes them worse. All it means is that there are now more images for your brain to call on the next time this happens. And you'll only have even more trouble trying to get it out. Those images will never, ever leave my head, and I will never be able to forget them. What I would give to be able to forget some of the images that have played in my head. If I could take a pill or stick an electrode into my brain and zap the images away, I would do it in a heartbeat. Because of the burden of carrying this stuff around with me, having it pop up at the slightest thought of it, and living in fear of it happening. I wouldn't wish this sort of thing on anyone. No one deserves to go through this sort of stuff. If hell exists, this would be it for me, being stuck in that self-traumatizing state. And as I've gotten older, I've managed to get better with it. These incidents or attacks, or whatever you want to call them, got shorter and shorter and easier for me to handle, to the point where the majority of these issues would mostly go away once I went to sleep and woke up the next day. Or at least I thought I had gotten better, until I encountered Made in Abyss. When I love something, I want more and more of it. And once I had gone around 2/3 of the way through the show, once I had gotten to the point where I was like at my peak of affection for the show, I was so in love that I couldn't watch episodes fast enough. I had to see more. So I went and started reading the manga. And it just so happened that the manga was, at the time, resolving its biggest and most intense arc yet. The infamous Bondrewd arc. You see, one of the white whistles that Ozen warned Riko and Reg about, in particular, the one white whistle that she said, look, don't even go near this guy, he is serious bad news, is one called Bondrewd the Novel, Lord of Dawn, who turns out to be sort of a mad scientist. He believes that something in the abyss kills off all life within it every 2,000 years, which is what he thinks killed the civilization that the relics now are being retrieved from. And with 1900 years having passed since the last of these theoretical events, Bondrewd begins doing experiments. very, very grisly experiments on young children. I'm talking about children having their limbs cut off, having their faces scraped away, being reduced down to a brain, a spine, and vital organs before being stuffed into metal containers no bigger than a volume of an encyclopedia, while being kept alive on stimulants until they eventually expire. See why I put in a trigger warning? Now, normally reading about something isn't as bad as watching or hearing about something, but not this time. This time, I had images of children being mutilated running through my head constantly for about 2 weeks. Yeah, that wasn't fun at all. And like I said, there was nothing I could do to stop it. I just kind of had to let my mind decide when it wanted to let go of all of this, which it never entirely will. Happily, I can say that those images aren't replaying right now, and don't replay when I reread the manga, perhaps because I read them rather than watched or listened to them. But yeah, for a series that I had loved and adored so completely and utterly, to suddenly turn around and deliver such a psychological blow to me, well, it hurt. It hurt a lot. It put me right back to where I was when I was a kid, right back to square one, and suddenly made me very, very aware of just how much of a hold my own mental illness can still have on my life and my own well-being when it chooses to. It made me feel, well, helpless. For probably about 3-4 months, I was completely and utterly done with Made in Abyss. I didn't read the manga, I only just barely finished the show once the stuck thoughts finally came unglued, and the trauma had numbed a little, and even then, everything still hung in the back of my mind the entire time and largely soured my impression of the final 3 to 4 episodes of the show. Now, I've watched dark shows before and loved them, and I've had shows take dark turns and have been totally fine. I watched Madoka Magica, albeit going in sort of knowing that the big twist was coming, but have never had a single issue with it. Spooky stuff is a little hit or miss with me, but mostly it's fine. I think that Made in Abyss just had way too much of a turn way too quickly. With things like Madoka Magica, you have little hints all along the way that things aren't exactly what they seem until the big reveal comes and suddenly all those little hints kind of lock together and suddenly make sense. But the Bondrewd arc just kind of came completely out of nowhere. It just comes so far out of left field that it's even hard for me to still think of the first part of the show, which I loved so much, as even a part of the same series as this. And, like, this also could have worked. It totally could have. I could totally see it being very effective, but it was just a little too dark, a little too quickly, and a little too abruptly, with too little warning. Everything else about the arc, I think, is up to the standards of the rest of the show, but I still can't forgive what the series did. That entire section of the manga is a great, terrible stain on something that was one of my favorite things ever up to that point, and is something that still hangs over my impression of the show. I wish it didn't, but it does. But you guys want to hear the most pathetic part of the whole thing? Just like Riko and Reg continue on their way to Liza after finally defeating Bondrewd, and just like Ozen going down into the abyss, even after it warped her so much, I have since gone back to the manga and have slowly begun to warm back up to it again, to the point where I think that while it still does feel like a completely different beast tonally from the one I knew, it's still really, really good. The Siren Song of the Abyss has pulled me back to it, just like it does for the Delvers of Orth, and everyone else who came before them and who may come after them. Because I want to know more. I want to know more of the 6th layer. I want to know why the 7th layer is supposed to look like a ring from above. I want to know if there are more layers beyond that. I want to meet Wakunda the Chosen, Lord of Guidance, and Shirajo, the obscure Lord of Mystery, and see what they're like. Will they be allies or antagonists? I want to know what happened to the civilizations that lived in the Abyss and their history. I just want to know more about this beautiful piece of work that has been given to me. But I can never trust it again. I'll never be able to enjoy it as wholeheartedly as I once did. Getting invested into a new show and series is something that's always been somewhat difficult for me. Partially because whether or not I jive with the show is a rare thing, but also because I'm so completely afraid of something like this happening to me. I don't seek this sort of stuff out. If I had my way, I would never hear or see anything remotely like this. So I would never have to go through this sort of thing ever again. So every single time I start watching a new show, I'm taking a risk. I'm putting my mental health on the line for the chance of discovering something wonderful, something I can treasure for the rest of my life. And I'm putting a lot of trust in the creators of this show to make sure that my trust isn't abused. But with Made in Abyss, It felt like this show abused my trust, led me into something that I would not have wanted or asked for. And you can say, well, don't be so entitled. The creators of the stuff can anticipate your personal reaction, and you can expect that they'll put your personal needs above their work. And yeah, that's true. But I and people like me at least deserve to know what we're getting ourselves into. This is what trigger warnings are for, and why they're so important. Like, trust me, I will be the first to say that as a mentally ill person, you do have to take responsibility for your own mental health and do most of the work yourself. And I absolutely try to. But I can only do that when I know what I'm getting into. What else am I supposed to do? Never watch anything ever again? Fuck anyone who says anything like that. If there is a moral to this video, I guess it's that this is why trigger warnings are so important. And this is why people need to think about what they write about in their narratives. I'll probably do another video on trigger warnings and go more into depth into them at some point. But like, this is perhaps, I think, like the most personal example of the need for trigger warnings, because I want to love Made in Abyss. I want to completely and utterly sing its praises, because I do believe it is so good. Beyond the questionable issues around its portrayal of its young characters, this is a series which has some of the strongest and most genius world building and construction that I have ever seen, and I just hope that someday I'll be able to make something close to as good as this. But I can't sing those praises because of this bad experience I had. I can't wholeheartedly trust this series because of the dark cloud that now hangs over it for me. And as a creator, I would hope that this is something you would want to avoid in your audience. I know that that's something that I definitely want to avoid as a writer myself. I'm not saying that you can't write about dark subject matter or write dark twists, but I would just ask that they question why. What purpose does it serve in the narrative? How are you going to write it? How is it going to affect your story going forward? How are you going to make sure that your audience doesn't become alienated by it? Because in essence, this sort of thing is you betraying your audience's trust. You're telling them that your creation is one thing, and then you completely pull the rug out from under them and you show them what it actually is. And while that can work, there is an inherent danger in that. And I'm not saying that Made in Abyss shouldn't have gone dark, but I question its execution. I think that Made in Abyss went a little too over the top with it and a little too gratuitous with it, because guess what? Not everyone needs the fact that everything is terrible and horrible and painful pushed right in their face. Some of us are just fine without that, thank you very much. Some people don't need their faces pushed into something so horrific and visceral. Some people get traumatized by that sort of thing. And when Made in Abyss did it, it really did make me feel unsafe watching the show, which is not the way that anyone should feel watching a show. If nothing else, I want people to understand that the writing and the content that they make has an effect on people. So if you're going to bring up very, very troubling subject matter and content, it's important that you do it carefully and you know what you're about to do, because while it could add complexity to your world and make your audience reevaluate their assumptions, it could also alienate and distress them too. Like I said, you are fundamentally betraying their trust. It's a balancing act, and it's a tricky thing to get right, especially when working with content as heavy as child torture and mutilation. While I see what Made in Abyss was going for, I don't think it was entirely effective, which is a shame. I don't know if it had to go down that route. I think that there were other routes it could have taken. And I guess that while the creator of Made in Abyss is immensely skilled and talented in world building and lore construction, he's just not so good at handling the sort of subject matter he chose to put into his content. I don't necessarily have a lot of intelligent observations about Made in Abyss that haven't been said already. Really, I kind of just wanted to make this video to talk about my experience with it and put it out there to make people aware that these are issues that viewers and consumers sometimes have to struggle with, and that all we ask is people to be aware of it, and that this is something that I struggle with, and that this is something I want my audience to understand watching my content. This is a series that deserves so much better than a I recommend it, but that's really all that I can give it due to my really, really negative experience around it. I love shows that make me feel good. Not even necessarily a particular definition or type of good, but just make me feel good in some way, and I'm willing to overlook a whole lot of stuff if the material made me feel good enough. Made in Abyss made me feel great for a while, but then it put me right back in a place that I thought I had grown beyond. It made me feel like I did when I was a kid, when I had no defense mechanisms to help myself, and that's not something that I look for in my media. I want to come away from a show like this in awe of what I've seen, and wanting to just consume as much of it as I can. But I can't now. Every time I see that the manga has updated, or when they finally do the second season, I have to approach it with extreme caution, constantly on my guard and constantly prepared for when it will all go badly, if it does, because it's happened once before. This is absolutely no way to consume a piece of media, but this is what I have to do, because my mental health is important to me, and it's something I want to protect. So this is what I have to do now, because this show hurt me in a way I didn't think I could be hurt anymore. I loved Made in Abyss. But while I still admire the show and still want to see more of it, still want to read more of the manga, I can't say that I love it now. And honestly, it really does break my heart that that's the case. I want to love it, but I can't anymore. So, yeah, there's a little peek behind the window of my childhood growing up. Trust me, it was not fun. The next video will be kind of continuation of this kind of theme. It's on a different topic. And really, that review, I think, it was kind of the show that I watched pretty much directly after Made in Abyss, but I wound up kind of falling into the same trap with it. But I didn't love the show enough to forgive it the way I have kind of forgiven Made in Abyss, where I've now kind of gotten to a point with Made in Abyss where I'm reading the manga again, and where I'm actually saying, like, you know what, like, the manga is actually really, really good, you know, even though it's still really, really dark. But the other show I did not love anywhere near as much as Made in Abyss, and so that's why I kind of want to do another review for the next video, because watching that show and having it all go wrong again kind of really made me realize something about how I want to run this channel going forward. So I'm sorry, but you're going to have to wait until the end of the month for one of the big rules of this channel to be explained and revealed, but that's just kind of how I've decided to do it, and yeah. So, sorry that this was such a downer episode. Hopefully anyway, though, that people appreciate this point of view and that it makes people think anyway. Make sure to give me a thumbs up under this video. Every thumbs up lets me know that people love my content and helps the cursed algorithms drive more attention to my channel. Make sure to share this with your friends so that way I can reach a larger audience. Subscribe for more reviews, hopefully not as depressing as this one. And if you are so inclined, and in such means, please consider throwing a couple dollars into the beat-up guitar case I have placed on the sidewalk that we now, in our modern age, call Patreon. I have some wonderful rewards there. I have some great tiers I hope you all really like. Every dollar really, really does make a huge impact on my life and helps me turn this channel into something great and helps me just immeasurably. The next video will be up again in another 2 weeks, as always. So, yeah. Until next time. May the privilege be with you. Stay entitled, snowflakes.